What if the one person who could change everything about you disappeared into a crowd of 8 million strangers? What if you had exactly 30 seconds to decide between the life you were born into and the life you never knew you wanted? What if that choice was made for you before you even realized there was one to make? This is the story of a man who had everything money could buy except the one thing that mattered most. And it all started with a blonde girl stepping into a subway car on a rainy Tuesday morning in Manhattan. Tell me where in the world you're listening to this story from, and at the end, comment on what you thought of the story or leave a suggestion for improvement. I'd love to hear your feedback. The Cartier wedding ring felt like a noose around William Ashford's finger as he stood in the marble foyer of his Upper East Side penthouse, adjusting his Tom Ford suit for the third time. Outside, Manhattan buzzed with its usual Tuesday morning chaos, but inside the glass walls of his $40 million prison, everything was suffocatingly perfect. "William, darling, you simply must try the salmon canapes before the caterer leaves," Victoria Pemberton Ashford called from the living room, her voice carrying that practiced sweetness that made his jaw clench. "Mother insists they're divine for tonight's charity gala." 6 months married, and Will still felt like a stranger in his own life. The wedding had been his father's masterpiece, a merger disguised as a matrimony between New York's two most powerful real estate dynasties. Victoria was beautiful, educated, and perfectly suitable. She was also about as exciting as watching paint dry on a rainy Sunday. "Coming, darling," Will replied automatically, the endearment tasting like ash in his mouth. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. Board meeting moved to 10 a.m. The Henderson Project presentation better be flawless. Don't disappoint me. Will pocketed the phone and grabbed his briefcase. The Henderson Project, another soulless development that would replace affordable housing with luxury condos, another day of making rich people richer while pretending it mattered. As he kissed Victoria's perfectly powdered cheek goodbye, she wrinkled her nose. "Remember, we have dinner with the Vanderbeeks at 8. Please don't be late like last week." "Of course not," Will lied smoothly. 20 minutes later, his driver was stuck in gridlock traffic on 5th Avenue. Will checked his Rolex, 9:47 a.m. His father would have his head if he was late again. "Take the next right," Will commanded. "I'll catch the subway." "Sir?" Marcus, his driver, looked genuinely confused. "The subway? You heard me." Will had taken the subway exactly 3 times in his 31 years of life, twice as a rebellious teenager and once on a dare in college. But desperate times called for desperate measures. The 59th Street station was the assault on his senses. The smell of coffee, sweat, and something unidentifiable hit him immediately. People rushed past him like he was invisible, a foreign concept for someone used to being recognized and deferred to everywhere he went. He fumbled with the MetroCard machine, cursing under his breath as it rejected his card twice. Behind him, someone snorted with amusement. "First time, rich boy?" Will turned to see a woman in her 20s with platinum blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing scrubs with cartoon cats on them and beat-up Converse sneakers. She had the kind of natural beauty that Victoria spent thousands trying to achieve. Bright blue eyes, a spattering of freckles across her nose, and a smile that looked like trouble. "I'm not," Will started defensively. "Sure you're not." She stepped around him and fed a crumpled $5 bill into the machine with practiced ease. "Here, let me show you how us regular people do it." She guided his hand to insert the card correctly, and Will felt an electric shock that had nothing to do with static electricity. When their eyes met, something shifted in the universe, or maybe just in his chest. "Thanks," he managed, his usual confidence evaporating. "No problem, Prince Charming." She grinned and headed toward the platform. "Try not to fall on the 3rd rail." The downtown train arrived with a screech of brakes and a rush of stale air. In the crowd pushing forward, Will lost sight of her for a moment, then spotted her blonde head near the far door. He fought his way through the crush of bodies, apologizing profusely as he stepped on toes and bumped into irritated commuters. When he finally reached her section of the car, she was standing near the door, earbuds in, humming along to whatever was playing. She'd pulled out a worn paperback romance novel and was completely absorbed in it, occasionally laughing out loud at something on the page. Will found himself staring. When was the last time Victoria had laughed spontaneously? When was the last time anyone in his world had shown genuine emotion about anything? The train lurched, and Will grabbed the pole to steady himself, his wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. The woman looked up at that exact moment, her eyes following the glint of gold to his hand. Something flickered across her face. Disappointment? Amusement? He couldn't tell. "Nice ring," she said, pulling out one earbud. "Let me guess, trophy wife or arranged marriage?" Will's mouth fell open. "Excuse me? Oh, come on, look at you." She gestured at his obviously expensive suit, his perfect haircut, his Italian leather shoes. No one who looks like they stepped out of GQ gets married for love. Too much money at stake. She was absolutely right, and it terrified him. "That's quite an assumption," Will said weakly. "Is it wrong?" She tilted her head, studying him with those impossibly blue eyes. The train began to slow for the next station. Will realized with growing panic that he didn't know where she was getting off, didn't know her name, didn't know anything about her except that, in the span of 5 minutes, she'd made him question everything about his life. "I'm Madison," she said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "Madison O'Connor. And you're way too pretty to be miserable, rich boy." "Will," he said quickly, as the train screeched to a stop. "William Ashford." "Well, William Ashford," Madison said, stepping toward the opening doors. "I hope whoever put that ring on your finger appreciates what they've got." She paused in the doorway and turned back to him with a smile that would haunt his dreams for months. "Because if I were her, I'd never let you ride the subway alone." And then she was gone, swallowed up by the crowd on the platform, leaving Will standing in the train car as the doors closed and carried him away from the most interesting 5 minutes of his adult life. He pressed his face to the window, watching her blonde head disappear up the station stairs, and felt something crack open in his chest. Something that had been locked away for so long he'd forgotten it existed. For the rest of the day, through the board meeting where he presented the Henderson project with unusual passion, through lunch with clients who noticed he seemed distracted, through dinner with the Vanderbeeks where Victoria complained about his lack of attention, Will couldn't stop thinking about Madison O'Connor. That night, lying in his king-sized bed next to his sleeping wife, Will stared at the ceiling and wondered if he'd ever see the subway girl again. And for the first time in his marriage, hell, for the first time in years, he found himself hoping for something that had nothing to do with money, power, or family expectations. He found himself hoping for a second chance. 3 weeks had passed since the subway encounter, and Will was losing his mind. He'd become a man obsessed, riding the downtown 6 train every Tuesday at exactly 9:15 a.m., hoping to catch another glimpse of platinum blonde hair and those impossibly blue eyes. His driver, Marcus, had given up asking questions after the 5th consecutive Tuesday of being told to take the day off. Victoria noticed the change immediately. "You've been acting strange lately, darling," she said over breakfast, delicately cutting her organic steel-cut oats into perfect squares. "Mother thinks you might be having a midlife crisis. Are you considering buying a motorcycle? Please tell me you're not considering buying a motorcycle." "I'm 31, Victoria." "That's hardly midlife," Will replied, barely looking up from his phone where he was pretending to read emails but actually Googling Madison O'Connor, New York, for the 100th time. "Well, something's different. You missed the Pemberton wine tasting last week. You were 20 minutes late to the Met Gala planning committee, and yesterday I caught you humming." "People hum, Victoria. You don't hum. You've never hummed. Humming is—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Undignified." Will finally looked up at his wife. Really looked at her. Victoria was stunning in that ice sculpture kind of way. Perfect, cold, and completely untouchable. Her blonde hair was always salon perfect, her makeup flawless, her designer clothes wrinkle-free. She was everything his father had wanted in a daughter-in-law. She was also the complete opposite of Madison O'Connor. "I have an early meeting," Will said, standing abruptly. "Don't wait up tonight." As he headed for the door, Victoria called after him. "Don't forget we have dinner with the Rothschilds on Friday. And please wear the Navy Armani, not that ghastly gray Tom Ford." Will didn't respond. He was already planning his route to the subway. Meanwhile, 23 blocks south, in a cramped studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant, Madison O'Connor was having her own crisis. "Girl, you are seriously losing it," her best friend and roommate Carmen Rodriguez announced, watching Madison pace the tiny living space for the 10th time in 5 minutes. "You met the guy for like 2 seconds on a train. He's married. He's rich. He's probably a total asshole. Move on." "I know he's married," Madison said, flopping dramatically onto their second-hand couch. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been moping around here for 3 weeks over some random Wall Street dude who probably doesn't even remember your name." Madison grabbed a throw pillow and hugged it to her chest. "Did you see his eyes, though? Carmen, I swear there was something there. Like he was drowning and didn't even know it. Oh my God, you're having a pretty woman moment, except backwards and stupider." "It's not stupid," Madison protested. "There was a connection. Real chemistry. I could feel it. You know what else has chemistry? Bleach and ammonia. Doesn't mean you should mix them." Carmen was practical like that. She worked as a paramedic, dealt with real life and death situations every day, and had zero patience for Madison's romantic fantasies. It's what made them perfect roommates. Carmen kept Madison grounded while Madison kept Carmen from becoming completely cynical. "Besides," Carmen continued, pulling on her work boots, "when has a rich guy ever worked out for you? Remember Bradley from that fancy restaurant in Soho? That was different. Bradley was a pretentious ass who thought tipping 20% made him Mother Teresa. And how is Mr. Subway any different?" Madison was quiet for a moment, thinking about the vulnerability she'd seen in Will's face, the way he'd fumbled with the Metro card like a lost child, the genuine surprise in his eyes when she'd called him out about his marriage. He seemed real. Like underneath all that expensive armor there was an actual person trying to get out. Carmen softened slightly. "Look, Mads, I get it. You've got that whole save the broken rich boy thing going on. But some people can't be saved. Some people are exactly who they appear to be." After Carmen left for her shift, Madison found herself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, studying her reflection. Her natural blonde hair was growing out, showing dark roots she couldn't afford to touch up. Her scrubs were clean but faded from too many washings. Her apartment was the size of most people's closets. What would someone like William Ashford want with someone like her? She was about to talk herself out of the whole thing when her phone rang. "Madison O'Connor?" The voice was crisp, professional. "Yes?" "This is Jennifer Walsh from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about your application for the pediatric nursing program." Madison's heart stopped. She'd applied for the program 6 months ago but hadn't heard anything back. The tuition was astronomical, money she definitely didn't have, but it was her dream job. "I'm pleased to inform you that you've been accepted," Jennifer continued. "However, we'll need confirmation of your financial aid status by Friday, or we'll have to offer your spot to someone else." After hanging up, Madison sat on her couch, staring at the acceptance letter she'd just printed. $15,000. She'd need $15,000 by Friday to secure her spot in the program that would change her life. She had $437 in her bank account. Back on the subway, Will was starting to attract attention. The regular commuters were beginning to recognize him, the impeccably dressed man who rode the same train every Tuesday, always standing near the same door, always scanning the crowd with desperate intensity. "You looking for someone, brother?" asked an elderly black man who'd been watching Will's routine for weeks. Will startled. "Excuse me? You've been riding this train same time, same spot for weeks now. Looking like you lost something important. Figured maybe I could help?" The man's kindness caught Will off guard. When was the last time a stranger had offered to help him with anything? "Actually, yes. I'm looking for someone. A woman. Blonde, about this tall. Will gestured with his hand. Works in healthcare, I think. She was wearing scrubs with cats on them. The old man chuckled. Son, you just described about half the women in this city. You got anything more specific? Her name is Madison. Madison O'Connor. Madison from the hospital? Will's heart nearly stopped. You know her? Know her? Boy, that girl saved my wife's life last month. Ethel had a heart attack right here on this platform, and Madison, she was coming home from her shift. She did CPR until the paramedics arrived. Didn't even know us, but she stayed with us all the way to the hospital. Will felt something warm spread through his chest. Of course she was a hero. Of course she saved people. She work at the hospital near here? Nah, she works at that clinic downtown. You know, the free one that helps folks who can't afford the fancy places. The old man studied Will's expensive suit with new understanding. You sure you're looking for the right girl, son? Before Will could answer, his phone rang. Victoria. William, where are you? You were supposed to meet me at Bergdorf's an hour ago. We're selecting linens for the Hamptons house, remember? Will closed his eyes. He'd completely forgotten. I'll be right there, he said, already hating himself. As he hung up, the old man was watching him with something that looked like pity. Word of advice, son, he said gently. If you're looking for someone like Madison, you better make sure you're the kind of man who deserves to find her. The train pulled into Will's station, and as he stepped onto the platform, those words echoed in his head. Are you the kind of man who deserves to find her? Looking at his reflection in the station window, the expensive suit, the wedding ring, the life he'd never chosen, Will wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. But he knew he had to try to become that man, even if it meant risking everything he'd been taught to value. Will stood outside the downtown community health clinic on a gray Thursday morning, feeling more nervous than he had before his first board presentation. The building was a stark contrast to the gleaming medical centers his family frequented, faded brick, barred windows, and a hand-painted sign that had seen better days. He'd spent 2 days working up the courage to come here, and another hour pacing the block trying to figure out what the hell he was going to say when he saw Madison again. Hi, remember me? The married rich guy from the subway? I've been stalking your commute for 3 weeks. Yeah, that would go over well. Through the glass doors, he could see a waiting room packed with people, elderly folks, young mothers with children, construction workers still in their work clothes. The kind of people his world usually rendered invisible. Will adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and pushed through the doors. The noise hit him immediately. Crying babies, animated conversations in 3 different languages, the constant buzz of an overworked air conditioning unit. Behind a plexiglass partition, a harried receptionist was juggling phone calls while trying to check in a line of patients. Can I help you? The receptionist, her name tag read Rosa, barely looked up from her computer screen. I'm looking for Madison O'Connor, Will said, suddenly aware of how out of place his $3,000 suit looked in this environment. Rosa finally glanced up, her eyes quickly taking in his expensive appearance. You from the insurance company? Because I already told your people. No, I'm a friend. Is she working today? Madison's in pediatrics, 3rd floor. But visiting hours don't start until... I'll wait. Will found a plastic chair in the corner and settled in for what turned out to be a 3-hour education in how the other half lived. He watched teenage mothers comfort crying babies, elderly men argue passionately about baseball in Spanish, and overworked staff members who somehow maintained their compassion despite being obviously overwhelmed. Excuse me, are you okay? Will looked up to find a young nurse studying him with concern. You've been sitting here for hours. Are you feeling sick? I'm fine, thank you. Just waiting for someone. The nurse, her badge read Carmen Rodriguez, RN, tilted her head, and Will could see the moment recognition dawned. Oh my God, you're him. I'm sorry? You're Subway guy, Madison's mystery man. Carmen's expression shifted from concern to something between amusement and protective suspicion. She described you perfectly. Tall, dark, handsome, and absolutely screaming, I have more money than God. Will felt heat creep up his neck. She talked about me? Honey, she hasn't shut up about you for 3 weeks. Question is, what are you doing here? And more importantly, where's your wedding ring? Will looked down at his bare ring finger. He'd taken the ring off that morning without really thinking about it, sliding it into his pocket like a guilty secret. It's complicated, he said lamely. It always is with you rich boys. Carmen sat down next to him, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. Look, I don't know what your deal is, but Madison's good people, like genuinely good. She volunteers at the homeless shelter on weekends, sends half her paycheck to her mom in Ohio, and once gave her last $20 to a patient who couldn't afford his prescription. I know she's good people, Will said quietly. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you look like every other entitled asshole who thinks he can play with regular folks' hearts because he's bored with his trust fund life. Will flinched. Carmen's words hit uncomfortably close to home. What if I'm not? He asked. What if I'm trying to figure out how to be better? Carmen studied him for a long moment. Then you better figure it out fast, because Madison's been through enough disappointment. She doesn't need another rich boy using her as entertainment until his real life calls him back. Before Will could respond, the elevator doors opened and Madison stepped out, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing scrubs covered in cartoon dinosaurs this time. She was laughing at something the doctor beside her had said, and the sound made Will's chest tight. Then she saw him. The laughter died on her lips, replaced by an expression Will couldn't quite read. Surprise, yes, but something else too. Something that looked like hope, quickly followed by wariness. William. She approached slowly, like he might bolt at any moment. What are you doing here? Will stood, suddenly forgetting every carefully rehearsed speech he'd prepared. I wanted to see you again. How did you find me? A man on the subway. He said you saved his wife's life. Madison's cheeks flushed pink. Mr. Johnson talks too much. He said you stayed with them at the hospital, that you didn't even know them. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Will said firmly. They wouldn't. Most people would have walked away. Carmen made a subtle gesture that Will interpreted as, don't screw this up, and disappeared back into the elevator, leaving them alone in the hallway. Your wife know you're here? Madison asked, crossing her arms. Victoria and I. Will struggled with the words. It's not what you think. Really? Because last I checked, a wedding ring usually means you're married. Will pulled the ring from his pocket, staring at it like it might bite him. It was arranged. By our families. A business merger disguised as a marriage. Madison's expression softened slightly. That's medieval. That's my world. Will looked up at her. Or it was. I'm starting to think there might be other worlds worth exploring. For a moment, they just looked at each other in the fluorescent-lit hallway, and Will felt that same electric connection from the subway. Only stronger now. More real. I can't be the reason you blow up your life, Madison said quietly. You're not. You're the reason I'm realizing I never had a life to blow up. Will took a step closer. Madison, I know this is crazy. I know I'm probably the last person you should trust. But these past 3 weeks, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. About that conversation on the train. About how you made me laugh for the first time in months. William. Just Will. Please. Madison sighed, and Will could see the internal battle playing out across her face. I get off work at 6, she said finally. There's a diner across the street. Lou's. If you want to talk, really talk, I'll be there. But I'm not interested in being anyone's midlife crisis or rebellion against Daddy. I've got enough problems without adding a married millionaire to the list. What problems? The question was out before Will could stop himself. Madison hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I got into nursing school. Pediatric specialty. It's everything I've ever wanted, but I need $15,000 by tomorrow or I lose my spot. I could... No. Madison's voice was sharp. Whatever you're thinking, no. I don't want your money, Will. I've never wanted anyone's money. Then what do you want? Madison looked at him for a long moment, and Will felt like she was seeing straight through to his soul. I want to know who you really are when you're not wearing that suit, she said finally. I want to know if the man I met on the subway is real, or if he's just another rich boy playing pretend. As she walked toward the elevator, she turned back one more time. 6 o'clock, Will. Come as yourself, not as whoever your family expects you to be. The elevator doors closed, leaving Will alone in the hallway with a choice that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Victoria's number, his thumb hovering over the call button. Then he scrolled to his father's number, then to his lawyer's. Finally, he put the phone away and headed for the exit. Some conversations were better had in person. Will had never noticed how cold his penthouse was until he walked through the door that Thursday afternoon. The marble floors, the pristine white furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their perfect view of Central Park. It all felt like a mausoleum, beautiful, expensive, and completely devoid of life. Victoria was in the living room, arranging white orchids in a crystal vase with the kind of precision that would make a surgeon jealous. "You're home early," she said without looking up. "I hope this doesn't mean you're planning to cancel dinner with the Weatherbys tonight. Mother specifically requested the Chateau Margaux 2010. We need to talk, Victoria." Something in his tone must have caught her attention because she finally looked up, her perfectly manicured eyebrows raising slightly. "Oh dear. You have that serious face. Are you about to tell me you lost money? Because Daddy specifically said, 'I want a divorce.'" The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite detonated yet. Victoria blinked once, twice, then let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Don't be ridiculous, William. Ashfords don't get divorced, it's tacky." "I'm serious, Victoria." "No, you're having some sort of breakdown. Did you forget to take your vitamins? You know how cranky you get when your B12 is low." Will stared at his wife, really looked at her, and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even guilt. Just a vast, echoing emptiness where love should have been. "When's the last time we had a real conversation?" he asked quietly. "We're having one now." "No, we're not. We're performing our roles. The dutiful husband, the perfect wife. But when's the last time you told me something that mattered to you? Something that wasn't about appearances or social obligations or what other people think?" Victoria set down the orchid she'd been adjusting, her composure finally cracking slightly. "What's brought this on? Is it work? The Henderson Project? Because Daddy says it's not about your father. It's not about work. It's about the fact that I don't know you, Victoria. After 6 months of marriage, I couldn't tell you your favorite book, or what makes you laugh, or what you dream about when you're alone. I don't dream, William. Dreaming is impractical. See? That's what I'm talking about. Everyone dreams, Victoria. Even if it's just about having better hair or a faster car or, is there someone else? The question stopped Will cold. He could lie. It would be easier. Victoria was many things, but she wasn't stupid, and a lie would buy him time to figure out how to extract himself from this marriage without destroying both their lives. But Madison's words echoed in his head. Come as yourself, not as whoever your family expects you to be. Yes, he said simply. Victoria went very still. I see. And who is she? Some socialite from the club? One of those desperate divorcees who hang around the charity circuit? She's a nurse. She works at a clinic downtown, saving people's lives for basically minimum wage. She rides the subway and reads romance novels and laughs at things that actually matter. A nurse. Victoria's voice could have frozen champagne. How wonderfully common. She's extraordinary. She's a phase, William, a rebellion. Men your age go through this. They buy sports cars. They have affairs with inappropriate women. They think they want some authentic experience. But it passes. It always passes. What if it doesn't? Victoria stood, smoothing her designer dress with hands that only trembled slightly. Then you'll destroy everything our families have built together. The merger, the social connections, the financial partnerships. Your father will disown you. My father will ruin you professionally. You'll have nothing. Maybe nothing is better than this. This? Victoria gestured around the opulent apartment. This is a $40 million penthouse, William. This is a life most people would kill for. But it's not alive, Victoria. We're not alive. We're just existing in a very expensive fishbowl. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost vulnerable. I know we're not passionate. I know this isn't some great love story. But it works, William. We work. We understand each other's worlds. We want the same things. Do we? What do you want, Victoria? Really want? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, and for the first time since he'd known her, Victoria Pemberton Ashford looked uncertain. I want... She started, then stopped. I want what we're supposed to want. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Will felt a wave of sadness wash over him, not for himself, but for Victoria. Somewhere along the way, she'd become so focused on being perfect that she'd forgotten how to be real. I'm sorry, he said gently. I'm sorry we were pushed into this. I'm sorry neither of us was brave enough to say no. But I can't keep pretending this is enough. Victoria nodded slowly, her composure reassembling itself like armor. I'll call my lawyer in the morning. Daddy will want to discuss terms, of course. The prenup should make things relatively simple. Victoria, please don't. She held up a hand. Don't apologize again, and don't try to make this easier. Just go to her, whoever she is. Go before you change your mind and decide that security is better than happiness after all. As Will headed toward the door, Victoria called after him one last time. For what it's worth, William, I hope she's worth it. I hope she's worth losing everything for. So do I, Will said quietly, and meant it. Lou's Diner was everything Will's world wasn't. Loud, chaotic, and completely unpretentious. The vinyl booths were patched with duct tape, the coffee came in thick ceramic mugs that had seen better decades, and the entire place smelled like bacon and possibility. Madison was already there when Will arrived at 6:15, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She changed out of her scrubs into jeans and a simple blue sweater that made her eyes look like pieces of sky. You came, she said as he slid into the booth across from her. Did you think I wouldn't? Honestly? I gave it 50-50 odds. Rich guys aren't exactly known for following through when things get complicated. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and sensible shoes, appeared at their table with a coffee pot. Coffee, hun? She asked Will. Please. Will watched as she filled his mug with coffee that looked strong enough to power a small city. Thank you. You two want menus, or you just here to make googly eyes at each other? Madison laughed, that same bright, unself-conscious laugh that had captivated Will on the subway. We'll take menus, Betty, and maybe some of those fries that are definitely going to kill us. Coming right up, sweetheart. As Betty walked away, Madison studied Will's face. You look different. Different how? Lighter, like you set down something heavy. Her eyes dropped to his left hand. Where's your ring? I gave it back. Madison went very still. What does that mean? It means I told Victoria I want a divorce. It means I'm here because I want to be here, not because I'm running away from something else. Will, Madison's voice was barely above a whisper. Please tell me you didn't blow up your marriage because of one conversation with a stranger on a train. I didn't. Will leaned forward, his eyes intense. I blew up my marriage because it was never a marriage. It was a business arrangement that I was too much of a coward to question until I met someone who showed me what it felt like to actually connect with another human being. That's a lot of pressure to put on a 20-minute conversation. Is that all it was to you? 20 minutes? Madison was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into her coffee with unnecessary concentration. No. It wasn't just 20 minutes. You've been in my head for 3 weeks, and I don't even know your middle name. James. William James Ashford. Madison Elizabeth O'Connor. She looked up at him with a small smile. Now, we're officially introduced. Betty returned with a basket of fries that could have fed a small army, and enough grease to lubricate a truck engine. As they ate, they talked, really talked, for the first time. Will learned that Madison had grown up in a small town outside Columbus, that her father had died when she was 12, and that she'd put herself through nursing school working 3 jobs. Madison learned that Will had wanted to be a teacher before family pressure steered him toward finance, that he'd never been outside the country except for business trips, and that he'd never had a friend who wasn't somehow connected to money or social status. "So what happens now?" Madison asked as they split a piece of pie that Betty had insisted they try. "I don't know," Will admitted. "For the first time in my adult life, I have no plan. No expectations to meet, no role to play. It's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time." "What about your family? Your business?" "My father will probably disown me. The business will survive. It always does. Money has a way of finding money, regardless of family drama." Madison set down her fork. "Will, I need you to understand something. I'm not some fairy tale princess who's going to save you from your gilded cage. I work double shifts. I live in a studio apartment with a roommate, and I eat ramen noodles for dinner more often than I care to admit. My world isn't glamorous. I don't want glamorous. I want real. Real is messy. Real is complicated. Real is staying up all night with a sick patient and then coming home to find out your rent went up and you're not sure how you're going to pay it. Then teach me messy. Teach me complicated. Teach me real." Madison studied his face for a long moment, and Will held his breath, waiting for her verdict. "Okay," she said finally. "But we're doing this the right way. No shortcuts. No throwing money at problems. No using your connections to make things easier. If you want to be part of my world, you earn your place in it. Deal." Will extended his hand across the table. "Partners?" Madison shook his hand, and Will felt that same electric shock from their first meeting, only this time he didn't have to let go. "Partners," she agreed. "But I still need to figure out the nursing school thing by tomorrow." "About that?" Will pulled out his phone. "I might have an idea, but you're not going to like it." "Absolutely not." Madison's voice cut through the morning air as they stood outside the gleaming headquarters of Ashford Financial. Will had explained his plan during the subway ride downtown, his first time taking the train as a choice rather than necessity, and Madison had listened with growing horror. "Madison, just hear me out." "No, Will. I said no shortcuts, no using your connections, and definitely no walking into your father's office to ask for money like some kind of pretty woman scenario. It's not about the money. Well, it is, but not the way you think." Will ran a hand through his hair. A gesture Madison was learning meant he was frustrated, but trying not to show it. "Look, my father has been pressuring me to get more involved in the company's charitable foundation. It's all tax write-offs and publicity, but they do give out educational grants. To people like me. To people who deserve them. You save lives, Madison. You're exactly the kind of person these grants are supposed to help." Madison stared up at the imposing glass tower that seemed to stretch into the clouds. Everything about it screamed money and power, and the kind of people who made decisions about other people's lives from climate-controlled conference rooms. "This feels wrong," she said quietly. "What feels wrong about applying for a legitimate educational grant? The part where I'm sleeping with the boss's son?" We're not sleeping together." Madison shot him a look. "You know what I mean." Will stepped closer, his voice dropping to that intimate tone that made her stomach flutter despite her better judgment. "Madison, I walked away from everything yesterday. My marriage, my inheritance, probably my relationship with my family. I did that because meeting you made me realize I was living someone else's life. But that doesn't mean I have to pretend the connections I have don't exist. It feels like cheating. It's not cheating. It's using the system that's been rigged in my favor to help someone who actually deserves it for once. Madison looked up at him. This man who had turned his entire world upside down for her, and felt her resolve wavering. Your father's going to hate me. My father hates everyone who isn't him. The feeling will be mutual. Despite herself, Madison smiled. You're really sure about this? I'm sure about you. Everything else is just details. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in the marble lobby of Ashford Financial, surrounded by the kind of understated luxury that cost more per square foot than Madison made in a year. Will was fidgeting with his cufflinks, apparently a nervous habit, while Madison tried not to touch anything that looked like it might cost more than her car. Mr. Ashford will see you now. The secretary who led them to the elevator was the kind of woman Madison had only seen in movies, perfectly put together, impossibly polished, and radiating the quiet confidence that came from working for very powerful people. Richard Ashford's office occupied the entire top floor of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, while priceless art adorned the walls. The man himself was seated behind a desk the size of Madison's entire apartment, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. He looked exactly like Will would in 30 years, if Will sold his soul and replaced his heart with a calculator. William. Richard didn't look up from the papers he was reviewing. I hear you've been making some interesting decisions lately. Hello, Father. I'd like you to meet Madison O'Connor. Richard finally raised his eyes, and Madison felt like a bug being examined under a microscope. His gaze took in her simple dress, her nervous posture, her obvious discomfort in these surroundings. Ah, yes, the nurse. The way he said it made her profession sound like a communicable disease. Please sit. Madison perched on the edge of a leather chair that was worth more than everything she owned combined, while Will sat beside her with the kind of casual confidence that came from a lifetime of belonging in places like this. I understand you're looking for funding for your education, Richard continued, his tone suggesting he was discussing something slightly distasteful. Yes, sir. I've been accepted into the pediatric nursing program at St. Mary's. It's a $15,000 program that would allow me to specialize in critical care for children. And you thought you'd come to me because you're friendly with my son. The implication hung in the air like a bad smell. Madison felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Will leaned forward. She's here because she's exactly the kind of person the Ashford Foundation is supposed to help. She's brilliant, dedicated, and she's going to save children's lives. The fact that I care about her personally is irrelevant to her qualifications. Irrelevant? Richard's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Son, nothing is irrelevant when it comes to family reputation. Surely you've learned that by now. Actually, I've learned that family reputation matters a lot less than I was taught to believe. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard set down his pen and gave Will his full attention for the first time since they'd arrived. I see. And is this newfound philosophy the reason Victoria's father called me this morning to discuss divorce proceedings? Madison felt her stomach sink to somewhere around her shoes. Beside her, Will's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. Victoria and I weren't compatible. The marriage was a mistake. The marriage was a carefully orchestrated alliance between two of the most powerful families in New York. It was supposed to secure your future and the future of this company. It was supposed to make you richer. There's a difference. Richard stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the muted noise of traffic 47 floors below. Miss O'Connor, he said finally without turning around. What do you know about my son's life before he met you? Madison glanced at Will, who nodded slightly. Not much, sir. I know he was unhappy. I know he felt trapped. Did he tell you about the Henderson project? No, sir. Richard turned back to face them, and Madison was surprised to see something that might have been sadness in his eyes. The Henderson project is a $40 billion development that will replace 6 blocks of low-income housing with luxury condominiums. William was supposed to present it to our investors yesterday. Instead, he was riding the subway. Madison felt cold. Low-income housing? Exactly the kind of place where many of your patients probably live, Miss O'Connor. Families who won't be able to afford the new luxury units. Families who will be displaced so that people like us can make more money. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Madison could feel Will's tension radiating off him like heat. The vote on the project has been postponed pending William's clarification of his priorities, Richard continued. If he chooses to remain with this company, with this family, the project moves forward. If he chooses other priorities, well, the board will have to consider whether the Ashford family is still capable of making the hard decisions necessary for success. Madison understood immediately. This wasn't just about a grant, or even about Will's marriage. This was about power, control, and the price of choosing love over loyalty. You're asking him to choose, she said quietly. I'm asking him to grow up, Richard replied. William has always been too soft for this business, too concerned with conscience over profit. But I thought marriage might help him understand that sometimes we have to sacrifice personal desires for greater responsibilities. And if he doesn't? Madison asked, though she already knew the answer. Then he'll be free to pursue his noble ideals without the burden of a family fortune to support him. Will stood abruptly. Are you threatening to disown me? I'm offering you a choice. The same choice every man in this family has had to make eventually. Do you want to be rich or do you want to be right? Madison felt something break inside her chest. She looked at Will, really looked at him, and saw a man caught between everything he'd ever known and everything he'd just discovered he wanted. I need some air, she said, standing on shaky legs. Madison. Will started to follow her, but she held up a hand. No. Stay. Figure out what you want, Will, really want, because I can't be the reason you give up everything, and I won't be the consolation prize if you decide you can't. She walked out of that office, past the marble lobby, through the revolving doors, and into the chaos of Manhattan street life, feeling like she might throw up or cry or both. Behind her, 47 floors up, 2 men who loved her in completely different ways were about to have the conversation that would determine the rest of all their lives. 3 hours later, Madison was stress cleaning her tiny apartment when Carmen burst through the door. Girl, what the hell happened? You've been texting me cryptic messages all afternoon. Madison threw herself onto the couch and buried her face in a pillow. I think I ruined everything. Everything like what? You and Subway Prince? The nursing program? Your life in general? All of the above. Madison's voice was muffled by the pillow. Carmen, what if I'm just another rich guy's midlife crisis? What if you were right and I'm setting myself up for heartbreak? Okay, back up. Start from the beginning. Madison told her about the meeting with Richard Ashford, about the impossible choice he'd given Will, about walking out before she could hear Will's answer. So you don't actually know what he decided, Carmen said when she finished. Does it matter? Either he chooses his family and I lose him, or he chooses me and I'm the woman who destroyed his life. Or, Carmen said gently, he chooses himself, and you get to find out what that looks like. Before Madison could respond, there was a knock at the door. Madison and Carmen looked at each other. If that's Prince Charming, what are you going to say? Carmen asked. I have no idea. Madison opened the door to find Will standing in the hallway, looking like he'd been through a war. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie was gone, and his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. Did you choose? Madison asked without preamble. Will smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all day. I chose you. I chose us. I chose the possibility that maybe we can build something real together, even if we have to start from nothing. And your father? Cut me off completely. I'm officially no longer an Ashford, according to him. No trust fund, no inheritance, no safety net. Will's smile grew wider. It's the most terrifying and liberating thing that's ever happened to me. Madison studied his face, looking for any sign of regret or second thoughts. She found none. "So what now?" she asked. "Now I prove to you that I'm worth the risk. I get a job, a real job, not some token position at Daddy's company. I learn how to live in the real world. I show you that I can be the man you deserve, not just the man I was born to be." Carmen cleared her throat from behind Madison. "And the nursing school?" Will grinned. "Funny thing about that. Turns out the Henderson project got voted down by the board. Something about bad publicity and community backlash. The company decided to redirect that development money toward educational grants instead. Weird coincidence, right?" Madison felt tears prick at her eyes. "You did that. You somehow made that happen. I may have mentioned to a few board members that destroying low-income housing for luxury condos might not be the best look for a company trying to improve its public image, and I may have suggested that funding education for healthcare workers would be excellent publicity. You manipulated them. I learned from the best. Turns out all those years of watching my father taught me a few things about how to get what I want." Madison threw her arms around Will's neck, finally allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this crazy thing between them might actually work. "So," she said against his ear, "ready to see how the other half lives?" "Ready to learn," Will replied, holding her tight. "As long as you're willing to teach me." Behind them, Carmen was already on the phone. "Lou, it's Carmen. You still need a waiter for the dinner shift? Because I've got a guy who's about to get a very expensive education in how to earn an honest living." 6 months later, the alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 6 months. Will reached over to hit the snooze button, his hand encountering Madison's blonde hair splayed across the pillow instead. She mumbled something unintelligible and burrowed deeper under the covers of their tiny Murphy bed. Will smiled and carefully extracted himself from the tangle of limbs and blankets, trying not to wake her. Madison had pulled a double shift at the hospital the night before. Her pediatric nursing program was demanding, but she was thriving in ways that made Will's chest tight with pride every time he watched her work. Their studio apartment in Brooklyn was roughly the size of his former walk-in closet, but it was theirs. Really theirs. Every piece of mismatched furniture had been chosen together. Every bill was split down the middle, and every morning Will woke up grateful for the cramped quarters that meant he never had to be more than 10 feet away from the woman who had changed his entire world. He pulled on his Lou's Diner uniform, a far cry from his Tom Ford suits but infinitely more honest, and kissed Madison's forehead gently. Coffee," she mumbled without opening her eyes. "Already made. It's on the counter." "You're perfect. Marry me." Will's heart did the same little flip it had been doing for months every time she said things like that. They talked about marriage, about the future, about building something real together. But they'd also agreed to take things slow, to make sure what they had could survive in the real world before they made it legal. "Ask me again when you're conscious," Will whispered. "I will," Madison said, finally opening one blue eye. "Every day until you say yes." "I already said yes. 6 months ago, in a diner, when you told me I had to earn my place in your world. And have you? Earned your place?" Will looked around their tiny apartment, at the stack of nursing textbooks on the table, at the photos of them at various New York landmarks they'd been exploring together, at the life they'd built from nothing but hope and stubborn determination. "Ask me again tonight," he said. "After I survive another day of Lou yelling at me for refilling the salt shakers wrong." Lou's Diner was already bustling by the time Will arrived for the breakfast shift. 6 months ago, he hadn't known the difference between a busboy and a short-order cook. Now he could take orders, work the register, and even flip pancakes without setting anything on fire. "Morning, college boy," Lou called from behind the grill. Despite his gruff exterior, Lou had taken Will under his wing, with the kind of patient mentorship Will had never experienced from his actual father. "Morning, Lou. How'd we do last night?" "Better than expected. That food blogger came back with 3 friends. Think we might be getting some good press." Will felt a surge of pride. He'd suggested they reach out to local food bloggers months ago, using some of the networking skills he'd learned in his former life. The difference was that now he was promoting a business he actually cared about, run by a man who treated his employees like family. "Oh, and you got mail," Lou said, tossing an envelope to Will. "Fancy envelope. Looks important." Will recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. In 6 months, this was the first direct contact he'd had with anyone from his family. His hands shook slightly as he opened it. "William, your father wanted me to throw this away, but I couldn't. I thought you should know that Victoria remarried last month. A very nice pharmaceutical heir from Boston. She seems happy. I also thought you should know that the community clinic where your friend works received a very large anonymous donation last month. Enough to expand their pediatric wing and hire 6 new nurses. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. I miss you." Mother Will stared at the letter, his throat tight. His mother had always been the gentler of his parents, but she'd never stood up to his father about anything. The fact that she'd written this, that she'd somehow arranged for the clinic donation. "Good news or bad news?" Lou asked, noticing Will's expression. "I'm not sure yet." The bell above the door chimed, and Will looked up to see Carmen entering with someone he didn't recognize, a young man in scrubs who looked nervous and excited. "Hey, Will," Carmen said, sliding into their usual booth. "Meet Diego. He's Madison's study partner, and he's been dying to try Lou's famous pancakes." "Nice to meet you," Diego said, shaking Will's hand. "Madison talks about this place all the time. And about you. She says you make the best coffee in Brooklyn." "She's biased," Will said, but he was smiling as he poured coffee for both of them. "Actually, she says you're thinking about applying to teaching school," Diego continued. "That's so cool. You'd be great with kids." It was true. Over the past few months, as Will had watched Madison work with young patients, he'd remembered his old dream of becoming a teacher. They'd talked about it late at night in their tiny bed, imagining a future where he worked with kids during the day, and she saved their lives, and they came home to each other every evening. "It's just an idea," Will said modestly. "It's a great idea," Carmen said firmly. "Madison's right. You'd be amazing with kids. You've got that patient thing going on. Plus, teachers' schedules would work better with her nursing shifts." As Will took their order, he found himself thinking about the letter from his mother, about the anonymous donation, about the life he and Madison were building together. 6 months ago, he'd been a millionaire trapped in someone else's life. Now he was a waiter living paycheck to paycheck, and he'd never been happier. The morning rush kept him busy until Madison appeared at noon, fresh from her morning classes and looking absolutely radiant in her scrubs. "Hey, handsome," she said, sliding across the counter to give him a quick kiss. "How's your day going?" "Better now." Will gestured to the letter, which he'd left by the register. "I got something interesting today." Madison read the letter quickly, her eyebrows climbing higher with each line. "Your mother sounds sweet," she said finally. "She is. She's just never been very brave. Maybe she's learning. Maybe we all are." Before Will could respond, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer it. "William Ashford?" "Yes?" "This is Principal Martinez from PS 234 in Queens. I got your application for our substitute teaching program. I was wondering if you could come in for an interview this week." Will's heart stopped. He'd submitted the application on a whim 2 weeks ago, not really expecting anything to come of it. Yes, absolutely. When would be good for you?" As he scheduled the interview, Madison watched with growing excitement. When he hung up, she threw her arms around his neck right there in the middle of the diner. "You're going to be a teacher," she squealed. "Maybe. It's just substitute work to start. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect." Lou appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. What's all the celebrating about? Will got a job interview. Teaching, Madison explained. Well, I'll be damned. Lou clapped Will on the shoulder. Always knew you were too smart to be slinging hash forever. When's the interview? Thursday. Take the day off. Hell, take 2 days. Practice your teacher voice or whatever it is teachers do. As the lunch crowd began to filter in, Will found himself surrounded by the strangest family he'd ever had. Lou treating him like a son, Carmen and Diego cheering for his success, Madison looking at him like he'd hung the moon. 6 months ago, he'd been surrounded by people who knew his net worth but not his dreams. Now he was surrounded by people who believed in his potential more than he believed in it himself. Thursday's interview went better than Will had dared to hope. Principal Martinez was a no-nonsense woman who seemed more interested in Will's passion for working with kids than his unconventional path to education. Your background is unusual, she said, reviewing his application. Harvard MBA, finance career, and now you want to teach 4th grade? I want to make a difference, Will said simply. I spent years making rich people richer. I'd like to try helping kids discover what they're capable of instead. And you understand this is substitute work? Different school every day, different challenges, very little job security? I understand. I'm looking forward to the challenge. Principal Martinez smiled. When can you start? That evening, Will surprised Madison by taking her to the same subway platform where they'd first met. It was rush hour again, just like that Tuesday morning 6 months ago. But everything was different now. Why here? Madison asked, confused but smiling. Because this is where it all started, where you changed my life in 20 minutes. I didn't change your life. You did that yourself. You showed me it was possible. You showed me there was another way to live. Will got down on one knee right there on the subway platform, pulling out a ring that wasn't a Cartier or a Tiffany, but a simple band he'd bought with money he'd earned serving coffee and pancakes. Madison Elizabeth O'Connor, he said, his voice carrying over the noise of the approaching train. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life learning how to be the man you made me want to become? Madison's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Around them, other commuters had stopped to watch, smiling at the romantic scene playing out in the most unromantic location imaginable. Are you sure? She asked. Are you absolutely sure you want this life? This small, complicated, not glamorous life? I've never been more sure of anything. This isn't small, Madison. This is everything. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. As Will slipped the ring onto her finger, the crowd of commuters burst into applause. Someone started taking pictures. Someone else started crying. The train arrived with its usual screech and chaos, but for once, Will and Madison didn't get on. They stood on the platform, holding each other, while trains came and went around them. So, Madison said eventually, what do we do now? Now we build a life together, a real one, with teaching jobs and nursing school and a tiny apartment and dreams that don't fit on a balance sheet. Sounds perfect. Sounds terrifying. Same thing, Madison laughed, the sound echoing off the subway tiles like music. As they finally boarded a train home, to their cramped studio, their second-hand furniture, their completely imperfect and absolutely perfect life, Will realized he'd been wrong about one thing. He'd thought Madison was the subway girl who had saved him, but the truth was simpler and more beautiful than that. They had saved each other. 1 year later, the wedding was held at Lou's Diner on a Sunday morning when they were normally closed. Madison wore a simple white dress from a vintage shop in Brooklyn. Will wore his best suit, not designer, but clean and pressed, and chosen with love rather than status in mind. Lou officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Carmen was the maid of honor. Marcus, Will's former driver who had become an unexpected friend, was the best man. The guest list included nurses from the clinic, teachers from Will's school, and regulars from the diner who had watched their love story unfold over coffee and pancakes. Victoria sent a wedding gift, a set of practical dishes with a note that said simply, "Thank you for setting us both free." Will's mother came to the wedding. His father did not. But as Will watched his mother laugh at Carmen's maid of honor speech, he thought maybe some kinds of freedom were contagious. During their first dance to music from Carmen's phone, Madison whispered in Will's ear, "Any regrets?" Will looked around the diner decorated with mismatched flowers and string lights, at the faces of people who had become their chosen family, at the woman in his arms who had taught him that love was a verb, not a noun. "Just one," he said. Madison pulled back, alarmed. "What?" "I regret that it took me 31 years to get on that subway." Madison laughed, that same bright, unself-conscious laugh that had captivated him from the very beginning, and kissed him as their friends cheered and Lou pretended to complain about the noise. Outside, New York hummed with its usual chaos. 8 million people chasing 8 million dreams, riding subways and taking chances, and maybe, if they were very lucky, finding someone who made all the noise make sense. And in a little diner in Brooklyn, two people who had started as strangers on a train were beginning the greatest adventure of all, building a life together, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. The end.